Hello, friends, and welcome to History Happy Hour. My name is Walter Earl Fluker. I am the editor of the Howard Thurman Papers Project, and I'm so excited to be with you this evening for a conversation with my dear colleague and one of the most prominent scholars on Thurman at this time, Dr. Shively T.J. Smith, who will share the story of Howard Thurman and his correspondence with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. But before I introduce Dr. Smith, let's start History Happy Hour like we always do, with a drink. Mixologist, entree. Welcome.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to join you for History Happy Hour this evening from Archipelago in DC. My name is Katie and I'm the head bartender here. This week we are going to hear about Howard Washington Thurman. His favorite drink was the margarita. So first you're going to add 1.5 ounces of tequila of any brand. Then 1/2 ounce of any style of triple sec, Cointreau, orange liqueur, something of that nature. And then you can either use fresh citrus, or if you already have liquefied citrus, that'll be 1/2 ounce, or you can squeeze half of a lime into your drink. Then shake and pour. And there you have it, a margarita. Thank you for joining us this week for History Happy Hour. Cheers!
Cheers to our mixologist, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Before I introduce Dr. Smith, I would like to direct you to enter your questions through the program using the question and answer, the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. All we ask is that when you type your question, you include where you are watching from. I've already seen several, and we have quite a number. Allow me to introduce Dr. Shively T.J. Smith. She is a scholar, teacher, and speaker on Howard Thurman. She serves as assistant professor of New Testament at Boston University School of Theology, where Thurman also served as dean and faculty member from 1953 to 1963. Smith has studied at prestigious institutions, including the historic Fisk University, Emory University, Columbia Theological Seminary, and Oxford University as an English-speaking Union Lord Fellow. She has received numerous fellowships and awards from organizations such as the Ford Foundation, the Mellon Mays Fellowship Program, the Social Science Research Council, the Forum for Theological Education, the Louisville Institute, the Calvin Institute, and the Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning. She has also presented for a variety of venues, such as a documentary series featured on the History Channel called Jesus, His Life, scholarly panels broadcast on C-SPAN, and events hosted at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. She is the author of the book Strangers to the Family and various writings on Howard Thurman that include Thurmaneutics, Howard Thurman's clothesline for the interpretation of the life of the mind and journey of the spirit. And she's also the curator of an award winning digital humanities project called imagesofinterpretation.com, featuring the writings of Howard Washington Thurman. Her forthcoming books in 2023 are on Howard Thurman and interpretation and the Bible and African American women. She is a resident scholar of at the Historical Metropolitan AME Church in Washington, D.C., and we are absolutely delighted that Dr. Smith can join us. Dr. Smith.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fluker, for that wonderful introduction and for joining me as a moderator and dialogue partner in this happy hour history moment. I'm going to take a moment to share my screen. I want to express my gratitude also for the White House Historical Association and their innovative programming, which creates space to share untold stories about a conversation chain between a First Lady and a university dean that started from the site of the White House and extended beyond it. For my time, I will track a year in the development of this unique dialogue between Eleanor Roosevelt and Howard Washington Thurman. This relationship is important because it provides a peek into the possibilities when the White House partners with the people to work towards dreams of a more perfect union. In 1944, Eleanor Roosevelt was the first lady living in the executive mansion of the United States, located, as it has been since 1800 under the presidency of John Adams, on Pennsylvania Avenue in the District of Columbia. Situated approximately 4 miles away from the White House and on the historically Black college and university campus of Howard University. In that same year, we find the first dean of Howard University's Rankin Chapel, Dr. Howard Thurman. Thurman had made a name for himself nationally and globally while going about his task of cultivating spaces for the life of the mind and the journey of the spirit for Howard students, faculty, administrators, and the broader DC community. That year, in 1944, First Lady Roosevelt entered a sort of pen pal exchange with this dean. Driving the formal and conversational nature of their relationship was a pattern of letter exchange, or what I call epistolary exchange. This relationship between First Lady Roosevelt and Dean in the literary form of letters or epistles would continue until the First Lady's death in November 1962. During the course of their 18-year correspondence exchange, Thurman transitioned from Dean of Howard University in Washington, D.C., to minister in residence of the Fellowship Church for All Peoples in San Francisco, California from 1944 to 1953, to become the first African American to hold a deanship position at a majority white institution, Boston University, from 1953 to 1963. Eleanor Roosevelt, Howard Thurman, and his wife, Sue Bailey Thurman, posted correspondences to each other annually about matters of race relations and social change, the cultural textures of the country, civil rights and democratic ideals, religion and spirituality, and they even sent literary gifts in the form of books, pamphlets, poems, and magazines to each other from time to time. The frequency of those exchanges differed over the course of their 18-year connection, and the correspondences from the First Lady herself was fairly short. But one conversational thread persisted. They were allies in the endeavor to make the country more hospitable, equitable, and accessible to all citizens. And their epistolary exchanges, starting with the correspondence mechanism of the White House in 1944, showcased their joint effort to cross the racial, social, and class divides of the country. Thurman is a figure, I wager, is a lesser known entity among our program audience today, and yet he is a formidable actor in American history in the 20th century. Permit me to offer a little bit of context about the Thurmans. Howard Thurman assumed the position of dean at Howard University in 1932. While serving as dean, Thurman not only drew the attention of First Lady Roosevelt, but before they interacted formally, he led the first African American delegation to India, Burma, Sri Lanka, and met Mahatma Gandhi with the support of the YMCA and YWCA international committees in 1935. It would be a journey that thrust Thurman onto the international stage of geopolitics and human relations that crossed cultural and religious divides. Thurman's notoriety as a university dean was pronounced. The August 1939 issue of the NAACP's magazine, The Crisis, profiled Thurman, calling him, quote, a preacher at large to the universities. The reporting journalist began the article saying, this title may be a bit misleading for Howard Thurman. Is more than just a preacher and more than just a theologian. He is a philosopher, mystic, interpreter, student of learning, preacher, and very human person all in one. And if he were not very human and understanding, if he could not draw very near to the young college people, all the other things that he seems to be would count for little. In the same issue of The Crisis, only 4 pages past the Thurman feature, the editorial spotlighted none other than the First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. The First Lady had just given a speech at the 30th annual conference of the NAACP and presented the Spingarn Medal to Marian Anderson. The editorial in The Crisis magazine described the First Lady as, quote, a woman of great courage and of unusual foresight who registered her convictions with force and persuasion. On the one hand, The Crisis highlights Dean Howard Thurman as a very human and understanding person. And on the other hand, only 4 pages later, it highlights First Lady Roosevelt as a human person of courage, foresight, and conviction. They are literally 4 pages and 4 miles away from each other in 1939 in Washington, D.C., and yet there is no extant trail of correspondence shared between them until almost 5 years later, when a mutual friend and confidant of both parties formally puts the wheels of exchange in motion with her own letter to First Lady Roosevelt, posted on May 26, 1944. So how does the letter writing relationship, what I call an epistolary exchange between First Lady and Dean, begin in 1944, and how does it evolve over the course of that year? While Roosevelt and Thurman knew each other by 1944, research in the archives of the Howard Thurman and Sue Bailey papers at Boston University and the Eleanor Roosevelt papers at FDR's Presidential Library in Hyde Park reveals that a formal and ongoing correspondence exchange between them happened under the signature of Mary McLeod Bethune. By 1944, Bethune's organization, the National Council of Negro Women, was flourishing, and she had just completed her years of service as director of the Division of Negro Affairs of the National Youth Administration appointed by FDR. But it was Bethune's close relationship, even friendship with First Lady Roosevelt and her shared Florida roots with Thurman that paved the way for the two to correspond. Thurman grew up only a few miles away from Bethune and her school in Daytona, Florida. In his autobiography, With Head and Heart, Thurman describes the impact Bethune had on him as a boy by saying, quote, "As a boy growing up in Daytona, I was, of course, familiar with how Mary McLeod Bethune started her school, and I knew the mission she felt she was fulfilling. Mrs. Bethune knew my mother by name, and whenever by chance she encountered me, she inquired about her. The very presence of the school and the inner strength and authority of Mrs. Bethune gave boys like me a view of possibilities to be realized in some distant future. Practiced in the art of connecting the First Lady to leading figures within the African American community on May 26, 1944, Bethune worked her magic pen again. She sent a letter to First Lady Roosevelt stating, "I regret that my illness will prevent my attendance at the dinner on Tuesday, May 30th, 1944, honoring Dean and Mrs. Howard Thurman and the interracial San Francisco Community Project to which they go in June. I am so happy that you are speaking on this occasion. I am personally interested, first, because the Thurmans are very dear to me. I have known Thurman since babyhood. And second, the interracial church community will be getting a big send-off by your endorsement. I want you to know a little more about them. So I'm sending some materials which might be of some help to you." End quote. In addition to her letter of recommendation for the Thurmans, Bethune included copies of the initial issues of Afro-American Journal, of which Sue Bailey Thurman was her editor-in-chief, and Bethune included the August 1939 NAACP issue of The Crisis that featured Thurman and the First Lady, only 4 pages apart. Leveraging the Postal Service and the White House mail protocols, Bethune made the implicit point that Thurman and Roosevelt were already involved in the same conversation. She set the wheels in motion for an epistolary relationship to form between them. And that relationship, bearing Bethune's seal of approval, deepened both of their commitments to American citizenship, inclusion of all peoples, and the freedoms of speech, assembly, religion, and the right to fair trial. Interestingly, about a month earlier, on April 25th, Dean Thurman sent the First Lady his own letter of introduction from the office of the Dean of Howard University. In the letter, Thurman requested a meeting to introduce his new venture. He says, "I am writing to request the privilege of a 30-minute conference with you at your convenience relative to the launching of an interracial, interdenominational church in San Francisco, to which I have been called, along with Dr. Alfred Fisk of the Department of Philosophy at the San Francisco College." Thurman reflects on this initial meeting in his memoir about the founding of America's first interracial, intercultural, and interreligious church community in the book, Footprints of a Dream. He said, "When I saw her, she was most gracious and gave to me the kind of encouragement that is so expressive of her amazing gift of intimacy." So to review, Thurman and Roosevelt are both featured in the August 1939 issue of The Crisis, but 5 years pass before they meet in person first at Thurman's request in April 1944 to discuss this new venture. Following that meeting, Bethune writes an additional letter of recommendation to the First Lady on the Thurman's behalf in May, and on the last day of May 30th, 1944, the First Lady offers a testimonial at Thurman's farewell banquet in which she counsels, listen to this, quote, "It is so much harder to combat discrimination and prejudice among older people because they have become set in their emotional habits," end quote. She encourages, in turn, the Thurmans to look to the children as the starting point of change in American social relations. The day after Thurman's farewell banquet, First Lady Roosevelt ended her popular syndicated column, My Day, June 1, 1944, with these words: "Yesterday, I had a group of Democratic women lunch with me in the garden very informally. In the evening, I went for a short time to a dinner given to Dean Howard Thurman before his departure for San Francisco, where he accepted a joint Negro and white pastorate of the Fellowship Church. Later in the summer, in August, on August 24th, 1944, the Thurmans sent the First Lady a letter updating her on their intercultural experiment and programming. In that correspondence, they invited her to join the membership as an associate member at large, and they described their children's summer camp in which they had followed Roosevelt's suggestion. Thurman reports to her this: "Wednesday of next week, August 30th, we close our fellowship camp school. Many times during these weeks, I thought about your suggestion relative to beginning with the children. Our school has an average attendance of 48 children made up of 4 racial communities: Filipino, Mexican, white, and Black. The age range is 5.5 to 13. The program content is built around one of the racial groups making up American life, including American indigenous peoples, Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, Russian Americans, Jewish Americans, Mexican Americans, Filipino Americans, and African Americans." Thurman goes on to say this: "The stories, the games, and as far as possible, the crafts use the culture of these various peoples. We do not know how significant ultimately this program is, but we are convinced that during the 8 weeks, there has been a softening of attitudes and a widening of cultural horizons for most of the children." The First Lady was so compelled by this social experiment in intercultural and interracial human relations in which Thurman took her advice and started with the children, that less than a month later, in September 14th, she responded to Thurman's request in a short 2-sentence note in which she said, "Dear Mr. Thurman, of course, I am glad to join your fellowship church movement, and I enclose my pledge. I am also sending a small check, and I am glad to know everything is going well." In October of 1944, a month later, Thurman mailed Roosevelt a report describing the camp and its impact. The pamphlet describing the fellowship community called it, quote, "a creative venture in interracial and intercultural communion." So it's at this point that I make the great reveal. How close were they, this formidable First Lady living at the White House in 1944 and Dean and pioneer of American human relations, Howard Washington Thurman? In the end, the series of letters or epistolary conversations between the First Lady and Dean cannot be characterized as deeply personal correspondences. Rather, they represent an exchange between the First Lady or first spouse of the Executive House of the United States and not just Howard Thurman, the Dean, but Howard Thurman, the academic, the pastor, and the human being. They find common ground, to use the title of one of Thurman's many books, in their joint investment in in an American human relations project that creates proximities and fellowship that transgress ethnicities and cultures, religion, class, and even gender. I am not sure we can call them friends in the same way as we would Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune, but we certainly can call them supporters of a common dream. Each, in their own way, attempted to infuse into the fabric of the American experience new conversations about the American project that outpaced their initial 1944 series of exchanges. Their literary conversations endured beyond Bethune's passing in 1955, and their epistolary exchange linked them as associates and sympathizers to each other's endeavors for 18 years. All of this culminated in their collaboration on the Committee of Inquiry into the Administration of Justice and the Freedom Struggle, for which Roosevelt chaired, and Dean Howard Thurman of Boston University served as a committee member through her passing in November 1962. In a letter addressed to Thurman just a little over a year before she passed, Mrs. Roosevelt invited Thurman to lunch in New York to, quote, take action in the very real crisis confronting CORE and their proposition that America is one country and that what injures one of us diminishes all of us, that each of us must take action to establish the American ideal. Thurman's response to the former First Lady's convictions and ideas is captured most profoundly in his inscription, as you can see here, to her in his 1959 book publication called Footprints of a Dream. Thurman says to her, to Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, from whom one of the first real urges to this adventure came. In the distance, between 4 pages and 4 miles, former First Lady Roosevelt and Dean Howard Thurman struck up a formal epistolary conversation in which they shared the dream of the fellowship community in society, church, and education, and espoused the American idea that, quote, normal relationships between American people should be that of fellowship, understanding, and confidence, rather than distrust, prejudice, and strife. End quote. I hope you've learned a little bit about the letter correspondence between First Lady Roosevelt and Dean Howard Thurman starting in 1944. Thank you for listening, and I invite my colleague, Dr. Fluker, back for a Q&A and some of our own conversation if possible.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smith. There were so many, at least for me, connections that you're making that are part of a network of especially African American women, which sometimes the public does not really know. For instance, Mary McLeod uh, uh, is just an incredible what Belinda Robnett calls bridge leader. These women worked within and outside of institutional networks, and they were able to create their own spaces. And so Miss Bethune is famous for bringing people to the White House, Thurman's included, and creating spaces where they gain what we love to call social capital. Capital. Can you talk a little bit more about these bridge leaders and this relationship between Mary McLeod Bethune and Sue Bailey Thurman in particular in this relationship? It's very important.
I think you're right. I mean, I think it's very important that at this moment, particularly in 1944, to talk about this relationship, this emerging correspondence relationship between the First Lady and Howard Thurman. It is necessary to talk about the platform and the relationship of not only Mary McLeod Bethune but Sue Bailey Thurman. I mean, one of the things that I think is very easy to look past is people, if they're familiar at all with this conversation and relationship, they'll talk about Thurman in relationship to Bethune, or they'll talk about Bethune in relationship to Eleanor Roosevelt. But sometimes people are aware that there was a relationship between Roosevelt and Howard Thurman. Most of the time, it's an untold story, which is why I hope this presentation works. But they miss the significance of Sue Bailey
Bailey.
Thurman across all of their projects. So Sue Bailey Thurman is actually the woman that Mary McLeod Bethune appointed as the original editor in chief of the National Council of Negro Women's Journal, the Afro American Women's Journal. And Bethune is calling this the organ of the organization. So it's Sue Bailey who is in fact organizing and guiding this news communication ring circle that's international and is really holding up and connecting the national organization from 1940 to 1944. There is hardly any issue that Sue Bailey publishes in which Bethune and Roosevelt are not pictured together or they're not referenced together in some ways. And then that 18-year correspondence between Eleanor Roosevelt and Howard Thurman is really care tended by Sue Bailey Thurman. But what is also care tended by Sue Bailey Thurman quite often is the ongoing correspondence as well between Bethune and Roosevelt and First Lady Roosevelt. So you end up seeing, again, the ways in which part of that bridge connecting is maintaining the flow of conversation, right? The maintaining the flow of exchange of ideas and organizing that I find very strategic.
Wow. Um, there are others waiting with questions, and I'm receiving quite a bit, but I'll take one other privilege as moderator. During the Second World War, especially around 45, 46, there were rumors circulating that Black women were creating Eleanor clubs. This was instigated primarily by white Southerners for a number of reasons. And Thurman speaks to this in 1946, 45, in one of his, I think, most scathing critiques of the church and its relationship to race, class, caste in the United States. He calls it the fascist masquerade. Can you comment on these Eleanor clubs? Do you know much about those? This is a point of serious interest because, in many ways, it parallels some of the ways in which we are having similar conversations in our contemporary context.
Yes, I mean, so it's interesting to track the sort of the way in which this rumor really begins and why it begins. Part of it begins, something else happened in 1944. What happened in 1944 was Eleanor Roosevelt made a very courageous uh, and bold move, which was two things. Well, number one was to give the great singer Marian Anderson a platform to sing in DC because she had been denied access to another venue, particularly by one of the organizations that First Lady Roosevelt was a part of. So the Daughters of the Revolution sort of stopped that from happening. And again, Bethune talks to her. Howard University is involved in responding to this, and Eleanor Roosevelt makes the bold move and gives her a space to sing in front of over 75,000
Wow.
people. That continued to snowball. As I mentioned, you end up even having the medal being offered to Marian Anderson by the NAACP. I always say that that's the moment that Eleanor Roosevelt started looking suspicious and really having some clear problems with certain groups, certain communities that she had actually been a part of for been a part of up until that moment. There was this clear social critique and evolution and move that she made in 1944 in a variety of ways that set up, like you said, the rumors and the contentions and the attacks that would follow, quite frankly, all of them as a result of that.
You have so many comments coming in. Let me try to at least go over them in the order that we've received them. Don Sevingson Holland says hello to you from Robbins, Iowa. And
Oh,
she asks, do you think that the era of correspondence as a historical reference tool is behind us? Are there pen pals anymore? Is
mhm.
email the same?
I love that question. Thank you for that question. I found myself in the archives thinking about, imagining if I might think about this correspondence chain as an early predecessor to, in some ways, our current social media and email scenario. Because one of the things that fascinated me about this, about my research, was the speed at which they were exchanging correspondences. So within the course of a week, so I mean, on one level, it to me, it attests to the mechanism of the U.S. postal system and the mechanism of the White House's protocols in correspondence as well. But in one week, you could see a correspondence occur between Eleanor Roosevelt in D.C., Howard Thurman in California, and then they would cross back to each other and respond, and then Bethune would have a say in something, so to speak. And so I think it is. I think that this becomes an early witness or testimony to the ways in which American politics, American social relations is defined by these sort of correspondence interactions. And I do wonder what it means for us to, instead of taking for granted the ease of the mechanism of email, if we slow down to realize the kinds of social relationships, networks, and possibilities we might be able to mobilize and do intentionally, if we don't so cavalierly engage in just the email just because, but recognize that it can have decades, right, and
Mhm.
centuries of ramifications for communities.
Wow. We have about 6 minutes, if I'm counting correctly. So here's another one, hot off the press. What was slash is your research process like? And related to that, you might add, where are these letters kept?
Mhm.
Someone questioning repositories.
Yes. So a few things. So I first, this is really coming to you, Dr. Fluker. I first got a sense that there was something worth looking at the Howard Thurman paper volumes, particularly volume three. I was surprised to discover and to see a sort of quick exchange between Thurman and Eleanor Roosevelt. If you notice, I am by training a biblical scholar, particularly a Christian Testament scholar working in the letters. I naturally love tracking letters. I love figuring out people's stories and their business, reading other people's mail, right, from the ancient world. So in some ways, this allows
Gossip.
me to gossip. I loved it, and so I thought, wow, I don't have to just read the mail from the first century Greco-Roman world. I can read the mail from the 20th century and see what's going on there. And so I ended up getting curious about the other correspondences that they're alluding to. So in the correspondence, Eleanor Roosevelt will issue a letter to Thurman from the White House that says, "Thank you so much for your correspondence that I received on October 13th. And I wanted to read that letter. So I went to two places. My own institution, the Gottlieb Archives of Howard Thurman and Sue Bailey's papers at Boston University. And I made the journey to Hyde Park, to the FDR Presidential Library, and spent time in the Eleanor papers there, trying to find all the letters that I could to sort of reconstruct again this epistolary exchange between them, and I continue to do that work.
Wow. This is fascinating. Here is another one of the same kind of questions, but one I'm sure you anticipated. Did Eleanor Roosevelt and Howard Thurman ever meet? I
Yes.
know they tried to meet. They were going back and forth with correspondence, but did they meet not just at the dinner, but beyond the dinner?
Yes. So the answer to that is it looks as if they did,
Mhm.
particularly when I'm looking at the later years in their committee work on core. So um, Eleanor Roosevelt was the chair lady for one of the major committees for the Congress of racial equality, and Thurman was on the advisory board for CORE, but he actually
Cool.
served on that particular committee meeting. So I read to you a little bit of this invitation that she made for him to join her from Boston to meet. So in that way, they engaged. The um, the correspondence chain shows that Thurman made a lot of efforts for them to meet in San
Mhm.
Francisco, California, and they kept missing each other in different ways. She would have conflicts in her schedule, or he would. So there is this sort of missing each other. But
Mhm.
it appears that there was some sort of meeting in the later years, particularly around the freedom rise and the freedom struggles and movements.
Yeah, there is a question here that I'll answer quickly so we can move. No, he did not meet FDR to our knowledge, but he said that Eleanor Roosevelt was the conscience of the president.
That's
That's
right.
to Steve. Can you just basically, before you leave us, uh, are there any other fascinating revelations
Mm.
for you in this process?
Yeah, I there's probably two, but I'll keep it short. One is I am amazed to realize the significance of Mary McLeod Bethune's
Mm.
activities in this period. Bethune passes in 1955, but from this period, I mean, the other piece is this research is a testament to what Bethune was doing in the Washington, D.C. area and across the country in terms of creating networks and relationships around matters of equality and access and citizenship that would really establish the relational architecture for other organizations in the 50s and 60s and so forth to go to do the work that they did in the civil rights movement and beyond. She really becomes an
Mm.
actor that I think that gets overlooked because she's gone in 1955. But it was Bethune
Oh,
who was
yes,
doing
yes,
who was
yes.
making these connections using the postal service, leveraging her relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt and others across the country and the world that really set the stage for the kinds of movements that we will see and talk about often later.
And part of the Black Cabinet for
That's
Roosevelt
right.
during
Shared it.
especially the late 30s through the 40s.
That's right.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for sharing and introducing to some and perhaps further informing others about Howard Thurman, but especially this relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt, Mary McLeod Bethune, and my favorite out of the ensemble, the inimitable, beautiful Sue Bailey Thurman. She
Yeah.
awaits her time. Uh, and thank you, Katie, our mixologist, for joining History Happy Hour to pick up and to kick off the episode with the margarita. I have mine here. It's not tequila, but it'll serve our purpose, and we toast you. And we hope you'll join us, all of you, for our next History Happy Hour on June 23rd. Good night, and thank you again.